All right. I should be live, and if I am, please let me know. But welcome to another Monday night where we're going to discuss quite a bit that's happened in the last 24 hours, as well as what's happened over the previous week. A lot of escalation going on, and countries are getting involved in this conflict to the point where it's hard to deny its status as a global conflict. And there's a lot that we need to understand is happening right now because we're only 2 months away from a new administration taking over here in the US, and it certainly seems like the current one is doing its best to push things to a nuclear level. So tonight's discussion is obviously about how the West wants nukes and troops in the conflict at the war front, and of course Asia and the Middle East are also joining in many ways. And this just goes to show you where things stand right this second. Could there be changes here in the near future? Of course, but what could happen within the next 2 months? A lot. And there's some speculation about why things won't escalate due to this idea of a new administration taking over, but I feel like that's not worth betting everyone's lives on. So, welcome tonight. I see that we have 5x5s coming in. I've got David Baise, always good to say your name. Jeffrey Starnes says 5x5. Jet says 308 by Hot Chocolate Chip Cookies, which I have to assume is perfect. Sherman Sales says Heckler by Coke, and I have one right next to me right now, so I guess we're in the right place. Exile Reviews, glad to see you. Thank you so much for being here and modding tonight. Of course, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel, and thanks to them, I can do live streams like this, give you guys good information as best as I can, while also giving you a place to get better prepared. So a big thanks to Midway USA, and of course, I do post videos on their channel as well, so if you're not subscribed over there, make sure you go check it out, because there's some good, especially entry-level type videos that I put over there in order to help anyone who's new to that genre get into the door, basically. So let's get started tonight. We got a lot to talk about. First and foremost, okay, I think that this is kind of on everybody's mind, but it's definitely on mine, and it's something that I wanted to talk about regarding the West wanting to possibly put nukes back on the table in Ukraine. And I feel like this is, well, it's just a questionable concept. Let's just say that much. This is from November 23rd, so 2 days ago. Report, U.S. and European officials discussed giving Ukraine nuclear weapons. According to the New York Times, U.S. and European officials have discussed a range of options they believe will deter Russia from taking more Ukrainian territory, including providing Kiev with nuclear weapons. The outlet reports that Western officials believe the Kremlin will not significantly escalate the war before Donald Trump is sworn in as president in January. Like I said, they're speculating and taking this risk. They're rolling the dice with our livelihoods and our survival by saying, well, it's unlikely they'll do anything crazy until he gets in office. And what this sounds like to me is that they think they have a free key to the city to do whatever they like over the next 2 months, and they don't think Russia will do anything about it. And that is a risk that personally I wouldn't be willing to take, but this is what they are doing. Following the election of Trump earlier this month, the U.S. and its NATO allies began taking steps to rush weapons to Ukraine and give Kiev the ability to strike targets inside Russian territory with long-range weapons. American officials who were briefed on the intelligence community's assessments told the Times that weapons will not alter the challenging situation that Kiev is currently facing. U.S. spy agencies have assessed that speeding up the provisions of weapons, ammunition, and material for Ukraine will do little to change the course of the war in the short term. Then why are they doing it, right? Because to me, giving them tons of weaponry and advanced weaponry that they haven't had access to or been allowed to use in the past should be for the purpose of changing the course of the war, or at least giving them a chance. But this sounds like they know it won't, so you have to wonder, why is this happening? Desperate to bolster Ukraine's standing in the war before the transition of power on January 20th, the Biden administration is looking at a range of serious escalations. U.S. and European officials are discussing deterrence as a possible security guarantee for Ukraine, such as stockpiling a conventional arsenal sufficient to strike a punishing blow if Russia violates a ceasefire. The article continues, several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. According to some officials who spoke with the Times, the administration believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin won't significantly escalate the war until Trump returns to the Oval Office, which is interesting based on the information we have now surrounding the idea of the use of an IRBM that we all watched on social media do some interesting things. But the escalation risk of allowing Ukraine to strike Russia with U.S.-supplied weaponry has diminished with the election of Mr. Trump, adding, Biden administration officials believe, calculating that Putin of Russia knows he has to wait only 2 months for the new administration. A lot can happen in 2 months, and that's asking a lot. Hey, Russia, sit there while we allow the use of these long-range weapons to bomb your cities and destroy military targets and hit troops and everything else, and just don't do anything about it for 2 months because, you got to talk to the next guy. So for 2 months, you really can't do anything about it, and we can just do whatever we want. I mean, I just don't see that being a logical thought process. That assessment is based on the belief that Trump and his incoming Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, will take a more favorable stance on Russia. However, Trump proved to be a Russia hawk during his first administration by ramping up sanctions on Moscow, providing lethal arms to Ukraine, and expelling a large number of Russian diplomats from the U.S. In September, Putin said he preferred Vice President Kamala Harris to win the White House. Trump has imposed as many sanctions on Russia as any president has ever imposed before, and if Harris is doing well, perhaps she will refrain from such actions, he explained. Much of the American political class has cast Trump and Gabbard as agents of Russia. However, extensive investigations into Trump's ties to the Kremlin have come up empty. Additionally, the Times reported last week that there was no evidence Gabbard was in any way an asset of Putin. So, they are throwing it all on the table and considering actually putting nuclear weapons back in Ukraine and definitely arming them with more conventional weapons, which we've seen being used here over the last week with impunity. And the whole idea behind it apparently is that, well, he knows it's 2 months and then it's going to be a different president. So in the meantime, he's likely to just hold position and just kind of take it because, he has to negotiate with the next guy. And I don't know, that just doesn't sound like something I'm willing to bet on, right? I feel like that is in many ways wishful thinking possibly, but here we are. So, just want to go ahead and jump back in here. I see Cold Reality is here. Randy Brown is here. Be Spooky. Hello from the hood. Well, welcome from the hood. We appreciate you being here. And let's see. Vanessa Stoller, late notification. Hi, everyone. Going to the beginning. Well, Vanessa, we're glad you're here either way. Thank you for jumping back in. And, of course, replay crew, make sure you check it in the comments below because you guys, I know you got to get to work. You can't stay up late and everything else. And I appreciate you coming back the next day to get the information. And I really like seeing you guys say hello. So thank you for that. So, let's go ahead and keep moving forward because in regards to that concept that Russia's not going to do anything differently and they're not going to escalate anything and nothing's going to change, of course, we also had Russian ballistic missile attack on Ukraine portends new era of warfare, which happened the day before that article was released. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm buying it, if that's a great strategy or not, because Russia decided to use a weapon that's never been used before in a hot conflict and showed the world what they were capable of regarding this technology. I'm not saying that it's better than anything we have or anything along those lines and that there wouldn't be ways to counter it if that was something we had to concern ourselves with, but I'm just saying that this was used in a war for the very first time, and I don't know if you would call that escalation or not, but I certainly would. So, this is from Ars Technica, and this article is from November 22nd. 2 days ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a change in the country's policy for employing nuclear weapons in conflict. Then on Thursday, Russia attacked the Ukrainian city of Dnipro with a new type of ballistic missile, capable of one day delivering multiple nuclear warheads to distant targets with little warning. Now, there are some things I want to go over in this article that I find kind of interesting and also some level of placation going on here when it comes to trying to keep the population calm. But I will say that the fact that they used conventional warheads on this attack rather than nuclear warheads was a show of restraint while also demonstrating what could have been. So keep that in mind as we talk about this. Putin says his ballistic missile attack on Ukraine is a warning to the West. By the way, we're the West, just in case you guys forgot. These events are just part of what has been a week of escalation in the war between Russia and Ukraine. In recent days, Ukraine fired U.S.-made ATACMS tactical ballistic missiles, and UK supplied Storm Shadow missiles at targets in Russian territory for the first time. This followed approval by President Joe Biden for Ukraine to use U.S.-provided longer-range missiles against Russian targets. Previously, Ukraine was only permitted to use them on its own territory. In a rare televised statement Thursday, Putin said he ordered Russia's military to strike Dnipro, home to Soviet-era rocket factories, using a ballistic missile named Oreshnik. This means hazelnut tree in Russian. The attack was the first use of the Oreshnik missile under combat conditions, Putin said. Videos from Dnipro posted on social media showed multiple projectiles exploding as they impact the ground at high speed. Local residents in Dnipro said the Oreshnik missile struck an industrial plant operated by PA Pivdenmash, formerly known as Yushmash. The PA Pivdenmash factory previously manufactured booster stages for the Soviet-era Zenit rocket, and most recently, first-stage tanks for the U.S.-operated Antares rocket for Northrop Grumman. Interesting. Threats from the Kremlin, okay? This is all talking about that missile and everything else. But here's what I wanted to touch on here, just to give you guys a little bit of information. Singh, and this is talking about Sabrina Singh, which is the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary. Singh said the missile could be refitted with different types of conventional or nuclear warheads. She said Russia notified the U.S. government of the planned attack briefly before it happened through nuclear risk reduction channels. Imagine having to use those right now, right? So if that is, at least in my mind, a very clear level of escalation. Hey, the nuclear phone's ringing. Oh, who is it? It's Russia. Oh, what is it, Russia? Yeah, we're going to shoot a missile that would usually be nuclear, but it's just not. So don't be freaking out about it, but we're just going to show you what it can do. Like that's a phone call that happened. You know what I mean? Like that is, I don't know, probably a little concerning when that phone rings. Ukrainian government officials initially said the attack on Dnipro was by an ICBM rather than an intermediate range weapon or IRBM. ICBMs typically follow long-range arching trajectories that take the missiles into space above the discernible atmosphere as they travel to faraway targets. An intermediate range missile, classified as a weapon that can travel between 3,000 and 5,000 kilometers, could also reach space, though the exact altitude reached by the Oreshnik missile was unknown Thursday. An IRBM and an ICBM, they can have similar flight paths. They can have high trajectories, Singh said. They can carry large payloads, but the main difference lies in the range and the strategic purpose. It just sounds like crap to me, okay? And this is what I wanted to touch on here in this article was, the difference doesn't matter. 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers is not like a short distance. The difference between IRBM and ICBM doesn't matter. It was capable of reaching the target it needed to get to, and it was capable of actually hitting the target accurately. So that's what matters. It doesn't matter if you get struck by an ICBM or an IRBM. You're still getting hit by this gigantic ballistic missile that's very capable. And so what this looks like to me, at least especially from our Pentagon's Deputy Press Secretary, Sabrina Singh, is a way to try to make people less panicked about the situation. Oh, don't worry. It's not an ICBM. It's an IRBM. It can only go 5,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers. Sorry. Not as far as an ICBM. But, well, I mean, they can go about the same height. And yeah, they can both go into space. And yeah, they both have multiple warhead capabilities, including the ability to carry nuclear warheads. But the thing is that this was just an IRBM, so what's the big deal, right? And I think that we can all agree that this sounds like a semantics tactic to make you feel like it's not that big of a deal. And that is problematic because the fact that they're even worried about the differentiation of these two different types of missiles tells you that they're worried in general. And the other thing that I want to throw out there regarding this whole situation is that, I don't know, how far is Alaska from Russia, right? How far are some of these other targets that Russia could hit in the United States? Do you think they're, I don't know, less than 5,500 kilometers? You let me know in the chat. But I have a feeling that this doesn't really make any difference at all. It's just they saved money by using a rocket with less fuel, basically, right? So I'm throwing that out there because I feel like this is one of those slip-ups done by our press secretaries within, you know, the Pentagon and all these different defense industries, where they say something because they think that it has a certain effect of making people calm down or not panic. But in reality, people who pay attention and actually understand the information are looking at it and saying, oh, they're worried about this, right? Because the difference doesn't make any difference at all in reality. Panic was their concern. That's my opinion. So, got great people in the chat tonight. I like seeing everybody here. We got Kevin Brown. We got Kanzi in the house. It's been a while since I've seen you, but maybe you've been here, but I appreciate you being here. Harbor Prepper, always good to see you. Porky Prepper as well. I really like it. So, these are great people. M, I'm glad to see you too. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some other escalations that they're trying to do. The title of tonight's live stream is the fact that they're also trying to send troops to the Warfront. And that is seemingly accurate, okay? So this is from the Telegraph, and this is from, well, today. Like I said, a lot of stuff is happening within the last 24 hours alone, but definitely this past week. I mean, it's been a little much in all honesty. Russia warns Britain and France against sending soldiers for hire to Ukraine. Okay? The Kremlin has dismissed reports of discussions between Britain and France on sending soldiers to Ukraine. A report in Le Monde, the French newspaper, claimed Britain and France had reactivated talks over sending Western troops and private defense companies to Ukraine. However, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said the report did not correspond with reality and had hit resistance in most European capitals. There is no unanimity of opinion among Europeans on this matter, but of course some hotheads appear, he said. Le Monde said sensitive discussions, most of which are classified, had been relaunched in the wake of Donald Trump's presidential victory, and a potential window of withdrawal for Kiev's support, citing corroborating sources. Now, here's the thing, okay? Everyone's making moves based on Donald Trump getting elected. Now, you might think this doesn't make a big difference because, well, this is just Europe, right? So if the UK and France wants to send troops into Ukraine, then so be it. We don't have to follow their lead or deal with that ourselves, technically, right? And that might be the case. However, don't forget, that they are NATO countries. And that if things start happening to NATO countries, then we are required to respond on their behalf. And now that had me thinking about some of the implications here of the fact that basically, if Article 5 gets activated while Donald Trump is in office, trying to diplomatically end this war, and Europe doesn't want it to end, right? And here's the thing. I'm going to throw this out here, and I know you guys, you take it for however you will, okay? A big thing that's been going on in our world, especially when it comes to certain, let's just say, ideologies, and here in this country currently right now, in my opinion, there's this machine of globalism, right, that exists not just in Europe, but also here in the United States. And there are people who are on certain teams regarding this globalist concept. And when you have the UK and France operating under that ideology, and maybe the US not quite, let's just say, towing the line at that point in time, they don't mind the idea of dragging us into it forcefully, right? And so this might be another strategy for them to still force us to be involved, whether or not we want to be. So, Article 5, if they get attacked, we, according to our NATO agreements, we have to respond. Be aware of that. This is partially what could be happening here, okay? Let's see here. We're talking about the troops, how they talked about it back in February and everything else. Now, here we go. Here's another symbolic situation that I thought was very interesting from this article. Sir Keir became the first prime minister to attend Armistice Day commemorations in France since Winston Churchill joined Charles de Gaulle to mark the end of First World War hostilities. According to Le Monde, a British military source said discussions are underway between the UK and France on defense cooperation, particularly with a view to creating a hard core of allies in Europe, focusing on Ukraine and European security in the broad sense. So we had a first between the Prime Minister of the UK as well as, basically, I'm sure Macron, the President of France, but also just being in France for Armistice Day, which is very symbolic in the sense of them approaching things from that World War mentality, right? Alliances, the allies, the Axis, and everything else related to it. To me, that was a symbolic gesture to kind of show what type of environment they consider themselves to be in right now. I don't know. I'm kind of shooting from the hip here when it comes to certain things because there's a lot to digest and there's a lot of different things happening, but I also think that they're putting things right in front of our faces right now that have more meaning than what it seems to be if you just read an article at face value. So I like to at least bring those concepts and ideas to the forefront to give all of you something to consider that might not just be, straight pure information. I think it's good for us to speculate or at least get some ideas about what's happening in order to understand just like exactly the way things are evolving, right? We have to kind of read between the lines or we're not going to ever figure out the full truth, right? Let's see here. Neptune's Trident. If Russia has or moves those missiles to their eastern bases, they can hit most of the USA. Exactly. And that's what I was trying to say through that whole conversation. The fact that they felt the need to come out and correct everybody's assessment of it being an ICBM and saying, no, it's an IRBM, made me feel like there's a motive behind that other than just trying to let everyone know you're an idiot, right? Like, oh, well, you're dumb. You thought it was an IC. It's an IRBM. Everyone knows that. No, what's the purpose of that? It's to placate the population and make them feel better about the fact that it's not a big deal. It can't go as far. It's not as big of a threat. In reality, it's the same exact level of threat. It just, okay, it can't go as far around the world as some other missiles, but they don't need it to. So, William Pence, hi bad. LOL bad. I'm not sure what's happening, but it's bad. So here we are. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some of the changes that have just happened at this war front to give you an idea of just like what's been going on over this past week, so you can kind of build some context around everything else we're going to move into here, because it's been a lot, like I said, and I mean, I don't want this to escalate. I'll say this first and foremost. Ukraine got invaded. Ukraine has every right to do what they feel is necessary to defend their territory. At the same time, they're going to do whatever they need to do, which means they don't care if it puts us in a bad position. They don't care if it might threaten the security of the rest of the world. And I get it, because if the same thing was happening here in the U.S., I'd be like, well, I don't care, lie, cheat, steal, whatever you got to do. We need to win this war, right? Like, that's just how things are going to be if you're at war with an adversary, especially an adversary who has a larger military and a nuclear stockpile. But from the other side of the equation, this is putting things into a very dangerous tailspin. A week of massive changes in Ukraine war and why they all matter. This is from 3 days ago. Okay, like I said, a lot has happened. The stakes have never been higher in the Ukraine-Russia war. Interesting. 1,000+ days into this war, the stakes have never been higher. And it's mostly because of the current administration deciding to allow for things that were never previously allowed for. Great. I think this good job. Here we are. In the week that saw the conflict pass its 1,000th day, Western powers substantially boosted Ukraine's military arsenal, and the Kremlin made its loudest threats yet of a nuclear strike. Here is how the last week played out and what it means. The West bolsters Ukraine. Late on Sunday night, reports emerged that outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden had given Ukraine permission to use longer-range ATACMS missiles to strike targets inside Russia. We know that. The move marked a major policy change by Washington, which for months had refused Ukraine's requests to use the missiles beyond its own borders. After the decision, oh, by the way, those months went back to before the election, so, interesting timing, but sure. After the decision was leaked to the press, a volley of ATACMS missiles were fired by Ukraine into Russia's Bryansk region. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but on a previous live stream, we talked about them being allowed to use the missiles, which I don't believe they had yet at that time. And I showed you guys a map that showed what areas of Russia could actually be affected by these missiles, and Bryansk was within that map. So I guess I'll give it to Newsweek, I believe, on that one for having it figured out in the sense of what was capable and what was likely. The Kremlin said 6 were fired with 5 intercepted, while anonymous U.S. officials claimed it was 8 and 2 intercepted. Whatever the specifics, this was a landmark moment. American-made missiles had struck Russian soil for the first time in this war. Then on Wednesday, Ukraine launched UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles at targets in Russia's Kursk region, where Ukrainian troops have seized roughly a 600 square kilometer patch of Russian territory. And that's 232 square miles for all of us Americans here. Later in the week, Biden added the final element of a ramped-up weapons arsenal to Ukraine by approving the use of anti-personnel landmines, which, by the way, are illegal in many other countries' opinions. But apparently the U.S. doesn't care, and we're not part of that agreement where those mines have been made illegal. Simple, controversial, but highly effective, landmines are a crucial part of Ukraine's defenses on the eastern front line, and it is hoped their use could help slow Russia's advance. With 3 swift decisions over a few seismic days, the West signaled to the world that its support for Ukraine was not about to vanish. And now here just gives you a little overview of what the Storm Shadow missiles are capable of. They can hit hardened targets before, being detected, basically. So that's the idea anyway, and this could obviously create some havoc inside of Russia. Now, Russia raises nuclear stakes. If Ukraine's Western allies raised the stakes this week, so did Moscow. On Tuesday, the 1,000th day of the war, Putin pushed through changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. That indeed did happen. The doctrine now says an attack from a non-nuclear state, not a steak, I guess I'm hungry right now, if backed by a nuclear power, will be treated as a joint assault on Russia, aka Ukraine attacking Russia is good for nuclear game now, because basically they're supported by us, by the UK, by France, and all these other countries who have nuclear weapons. The Kremlin then took its response a step further by deploying a new type of missile, the Oreshnik, to strike Ukrainian city of Dnipro, which we talked about already. Okay? Now, here's an interesting part of this article that I wanted to share with you. A global conflict. And a lot of people are still kind of like figuring this out. You guys probably aren't. You're very smart and you're preparing, which means you're already ahead of the game and you have reasons to prepare, which I agree with. But this war is already a global conflict. It's World War III. It's not going to get the title until either it's over or until something really crazy happens that we have to just admit face value to the public that, yeah, that nuke just happened. So, yeah, this is the thing now. But here's the thing. We're going to go back in the history books and it's going to say, oh, it started, February 2022. Or it started, I don't know, January 2020, right? For all we know. So there's a lot of things that could happen. But regardless, even now, the leaders of the world are coming out and saying this is a global conflict. So pay attention to this. In a rare televised address on Thursday evening, the Russian president warned that the war had acquired elements of a global character. That assessment was echoed by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who said the threat is serious and real when it comes to global conflict. The US and the UK are now more deeply involved than ever, while the deployment of North Korean troops to fight alongside Russia saw another nuclear power enter the war. And don't forget, that's true. North Korea is a nuclear power. Okay? North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said on Thursday that never before has the threat of a nuclear war been greater, blaming the US for its aggressive and hostile policy towards Pyongyang. Now, of course, I don't necessarily buy all that, but because North Korea has been a provocateur for quite some time. Regardless, it's a global conflict. And I'm going to show you that right now because, we're going to go around the world and everyone is involved in this particular war. I'm not even just talking about the war in the Middle East right now. I'm not even talking about anything happening, in the South China Sea per se. And I'm not even talking about any of the crazy stuff happening in other parts of the world that we don't even examine anymore, like Africa, right? But this war has spilled over its borders to every hemisphere. And first we're going to talk about our own hemisphere. All right, I'll restate that. My own hemisphere. Maybe you don't live in the Western Hemisphere, but I'm glad you're here anyway, okay? MacBean Scottish Fitness, good to see you. Glad you are here. We also have Oki Khan here. We have Gandalf the Grey as well. And then we have Don Pyle. So we have some really good people here in the chat that I always appreciate seeing. Harbor Prepper with a $10 super chat. That is nuts. And Polar Patriot, no, mods have blue tags. Green tags are for channel members. If you want to be a channel member, you can hit the join button down below and you can come to the private live chat after this stream tonight. That's the perk. You get that perk. All right, Harbor Prepper, as a former military contingency planner, I note that this administration is not giving and has never given Ukraine enough to win, just enough to not lose. That way the defense contracts keep making money, and I think many of us can easily agree with that sentiment because it does seem to be quite the moneymaker in the sense of the arms trade. So 100%, I totally get that, and I think that could be why there's this mad rush to dump weapons and supplies and use the weapons they have right now because they need to use them to justify supplying more. And of course, there are possible ties with certain people within our administration currently that may or may not have reasons to, when you take money because it's dirty and then you put it in the washing machine to make sure it's clean afterward because you don't want to give people dirty money, right? A lot of that could be happening for all I know, and there's a lot of washing that needs to be done. So these things happen. But either way, Harbor Prepper, I think we are, I think we're on that. Silent Guard says, how are we making money off this? We're not making money off this, unfortunately. We're not, but some people in the government certainly are, I'm sure. Let's see here. Fire 93950. Hello from Sacramento. Got to tell me how you escaped this place. Well, I used to live in Sacramento, and I enjoyed my time there. But you know how I escaped it? I got a job promotion. I had to move to the East Bay area. Everything was too expensive. I suddenly found myself not making as much money as originally promised. I was about to fall flat on my face, so I looked for jobs that offered relocation packages where I wouldn't have to spend any of my own dollars to find myself in a new area, and I found one in North Dakota, and here I am. That's literally what happened as quickly as I could say it. So let's go ahead and talk about what's happening now in our hemisphere, the American hemisphere, the Western hemisphere. If you're in the UK and everyone else, this is your hemisphere too, but if you're somewhere else, like maybe you're hanging out watching from Thailand, you know what? This is still for you too because it's still important information. All right, the Havana Times, Cuba. Might Russia install missiles in Cuba and Venezuela? Well, this is from yesterday, November 24th. So, like I said, a lot has happened, okay? Havana Times. Por 14.5. I don't know what that means for this article for 14 and a half, but here we are. The first president of the Russian Defense Committee, Alexei Zurevlev, that second V really got me, proposed this Friday that the Kremlin place missiles in Cuba and Venezuela to attack the United States. Like, not just to put them there, but to attack us. It's not the first time that the Duma deputy suggests returning to the tension of the October crisis in 1962. But this time he does so in relation to the aid that the West provides to Ukraine. This would be an appropriate response, he says. In conversation with the Russian news media News, Zurevlev explained that Moscow's response to Kiev is already underway, and with considerable success, we are moving forward, and we will continue to move forward until they understand that Ukraine must simply capitulate. However, the deputy believes that a forceful warning to Ukraine's allies is necessary. The answer can be the following. Supply medium and short-range missiles to Venezuela and Cuba, repeated the parliamentarian, whose vision of Moscow's partners has the militaristic and utilitarian tang of relations with the disappeared USSR. The intention remains, however, to respond to the Ukrainian attacks with British Storm Shadow long-range missiles on Russian territory. He also recalled that the United States gave Poland an anti-missile system that the country bordering Ukraine and Belarus can launch Tomahawk cruise missiles that could easily reach Russian territory. Likewise, it is necessary to provide Venezuela and Cuba with similar means, such as air defense with the capacity to launch missile attacks on the territory of the United States, he reaffirmed. Just a few days ago, U.S. President Joe Biden authorized ATACMS missiles, right? We already know how that works, okay? Zurevlev is not the only one in favor of the militarization of Venezuela and Cuba by Russia. Last July, legislator Sergei Mironov, leader of the Just Russia coalition and close to Vladimir Putin, suggested a similar deployment. The politician, a member of the lower house of parliament, said that installing weapons on the island is one of the Kremlin's many options if it wants to respond to Western support for Ukraine. So, they are serious about the idea of throwing missiles on Cuba and Venezuela that would have the capacity of striking the U.S. as a response to us arming Ukraine. Now, first off, I don't want that to happen. Second off, they can do that, and I mean, it'd be hypocritical in a way for me to say, well, they can't do that, right? Because that's what we're doing. And so that's what they're trying to say now, tit for tat. I don't like it because we don't want missiles pointed at us from Cuba, and how long of a response time does that give you? Cuba's 90 miles from Florida. That doesn't take very long for a missile to reach. So be aware of that. Now, in other parts of the world that are all connected to this one conflict, right? And that's how this is going. Like it's global. It is global. So, check out this. To preface this conversation, I want to say that China has been very quiet. Now, the press is coming out saying, well, we believe China is upset with things that are happening right now between Russia and North Korea. And I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of this information is, in the sense of like what reaction they're trying to elicit, but China controls North Korea. We've all known that forever. China funds North Korea. Anything North Korea spends money on has to get like a green light from China. China's allowing this to happen, to work with Russia directly as a proxy. And yet the media is talking about how China's upset about it. Like, it's like the most ridiculous thing, but it's still important to understand because China is involved one way or the other, whether or not it's because they're upset about the situation or it's because they're pulling the strings, right? So let's talk about it. And of course, I did see a super chat come in from the one and only Porky Prepper. Bottom line, we need to be ready for everything that we can within reason. A well-rounded prep. We cannot be ready for anything that pops up. Pace, training, practice, knowledge, and gear. Good points, Porky Prepper. And I agree, it's hard to be ready for everything, but it is important to understand that just about anything could happen at this point in time. So I find that to be very beneficial, and I appreciate you sending that a message. So, China, unnerved by Russia's growing ties with North Korea, claims U.S. official. Now, the U.S. officials that are saying these things, usually under, anonymity, they have an agenda. They just do. And this one looks to me like another Sabrina Singh scenario, right? ICBM, it's an IRBM. This looks like, it's China's actually upset about this. Because, we still have to work with China directly or else our economy will have a bad time. So, no, it's not China. And in fact, North Korea is doing this all on their own. China's really mad about it. And it makes you wonder, well, why? Why are we, I don't know, protecting China's reputation regarding this matter? I mean, there are people within our government who have direct ties with China. It's just the way it is. I don't know what else to say. China is increasingly uncomfortable about North Korea's engagement with Russia and finds the growing cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow unnerving. Kurt Campbell, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, has said. He was leaning into a growing debate among the U.S.'s security partners in Asia on whether China supports the decision of North Korea's Kim Jong-un to send 10,000 troops to fight for Russia against Ukraine. It is said the North Korean troops are now inside Russia. There are also doubts in the Japanese foreign ministry that China supports North Korea's dispatch of troops. Officials say China has largely been silent over the issue and may be worried that the military collusion in Ukraine will help an American drive to form a network of alliances with South Korea and Japan in East Asia that Beijing already views as aimed at curbing its power. We already are allied with South Korea and Japan. In a rare olive branch, China has told Japan it intends to remove a buoy and installed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone near the Japanese-administered Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. Although the step is small, the islands are a flashpoint between Japan and China, and it is seen as a symbolic of an effort to encourage those inside Japan that do not want to be drawn in to a U.S.-led conflict with China. Oh, Japanese people, don't get mad at China. We're trying to be nice with you guys. We don't want to fight with you guys, right? This is interesting. In a recent seminar at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington think tank, Campbell said the topic that is becoming increasingly uncomfortable for China, interlocutors, is the DPRK engagement with Russia. I don't say interlocutors very often, so it took me a second to get through that one. In some of the discussions we have had, it seems we are informing them of things that they were unaware of with regard to DPRK pursuits, and they are concerned that Russian encouragement might lead the DPRK to contemplate either actions or military actions that might not be in China's interests. Really? Okay. I don't think we need to go any further on that. But it's very clear that for some reason they're trying to separate China and North Korea. And so if this war goes hot, which they're trying to do, they are 100% trying to make this war go hot. That's what it looks like to me. From a bird's eye point of view, from a layman's point of view, if you didn't want this war to go hot in the sense of like hotter, you probably wouldn't be doing the things you're doing right now, right? So the other consideration to make here is that because of our ties with China, and because of the ties that some of the people within our current administration have with China, they're removing China's culpability by separating North Korea from China and saying that North Korea is entirely on its own, right? It's sovereign. It's not working with China. So anything that happens here in the immediacy is not China. So North Korea and Russia have some kind of crazy strike occur or whatever happens, this thing escalates, a nuclear device gets detonated or something along those lines, China's not involved, don't worry. So we're going to go in there and we're going to have to fight Russia and we're going to have to fight North Korea. But we're not fighting China because, it has nothing to do with them. But for years and years and years and years, I've been told that China controls North Korea and that China pulls the strings and that China makes every decision, especially economically, for North Korea. So why am I suddenly being told that they have no say in what's going on and that they have no awareness, actually? In fact, they didn't even know some of the things that we know that North Korea is doing in Russia and Ukraine, right? Good thing we told them or else they would have had no idea. Think about that, because I think there's more to that than what it sounds like at first glance. There's a reason why they're trying to remove China's partnership with North Korea for this particular moment in time. Now, that being said, here's evidence that, in my opinion, would show quite the opposite. This is from 41 minutes ago, apparently. North Korea ballistic missile facility growing as revealed by new satellite images. Now, there's no way this is from 41 minutes ago, but it must have been updated 41 minutes ago. U.S. defense experts revealed on Monday, November 25th, that's today, that they believe that Pyongyang may be ramping up its production of weapons for Moscow to use in its war in Ukraine. Researchers said new satellite images reveal North Korea is expanding a crucial weapons manufacturing complex that produces short-range missiles. The California think tank behind the findings noted that the plant is the only one known to produce a certain class of ballistic missiles used by Russia to strike Ukrainian forces. Known as the KN-23, the rockets are reportedly capable of evading missile defense systems by flying at low altitudes, which makes them useful for Russian forces trying to penetrate Ukrainian air defenses. The satellite images show what reportedly appears to be an additional assembly building under construction and a housing structure for workers near North Korea's east coast. Now, you're telling me that North Korea is expanding its production capacity at its ballistic missile facility, and they somehow economically have the ability to do so without any involvement from China, right? Without any green lights from China, without anything related to China, especially any of the components or the materials or anything else that they probably sourced from China. So keep that in mind. There's something weird going on here. China's definitely involved. North Korea is their proxy just as much as, the Wagner group is Russia's proxy, just as much as, Ukraine is the West's proxy, just as much as any of these other proxy nations are what they are, right? Israel is the United States' proxy. Like, however you want to look at it, that's what it looks like is happening right there. So I don't know. I'm just saying there's something weird going on there. Now, of course, Asia isn't just related to North Korea and China. There's a little bit more to it as well. And I think that South Korea is getting upset because they're being left out. Now, there's a funny, I'm not going to say funny, okay? There's an interesting, I'm not going to say Freudian slip, but like a admission of truth maybe in this article that I found to kind of maybe showcase what exactly is going on right now too, especially regarding countries getting involved in this current conflict. And I think it's something we've talked about previously, but it's just to hear it from a nation state who's considering getting directly involved in this war is telling, right? Russia warns South Korea against supplying weapons to Ukraine. Also from today, November 25th. So like at 24 hours has been kind of wild, actually. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko issued a warning to South Korea against supplying lethal aid to Ukraine, saying that the move would fully destroy relations between the two countries. Seoul must realize that the possible use of South Korean weapons to kill Russian citizens will fully destroy relations between our countries, Rudenko told state news agency TASS Sunday. Of course, we will respond in every way that we find necessary. If it is unlikely that this will strengthen the security of the Republic of Korea itself. The Republic of Korea is the official name of South Korea. Seoul has provided humanitarian and financial aid to Ukraine, but has so far refrained from directly supplying weapons for Kiev's defense against a Russian invasion that began in February 2022. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said earlier this month, however, that Seoul would not rule out weapons support to Ukraine in the wake of North Korea deploying troops to Russia. As the North Korean military gains experience in modern warfare, it could become a serious problem for our security, Yoon said at press conference on November 7th. So we will change the support level from the previous humanitarian nature, depending on the degree of involvement of the North Korean military. We will not rule out weapons support to Ukraine. This is the part that I think is telling, and that I think, like I said, isn't necessarily a Freudian slip, but it's just the admission of truth. They are worried about the experience that these militaries are getting, and the militaries who are getting involved from the outside right now are wanting to get that experience as well, because without it, they're falling behind their adversaries. Right now, South Korea is concerned that North Korea is learning how to fight modern warfare on an actual hot battlefield that they can then apply to fighting the South Koreans in the future. And so now South Korea has to consider whether or not getting involved and the risks thereof of getting involved is worth it in order to ensure that their troops also have that similar combat experience. And I think we're seeing that when it comes to a lot of these other nations that seem to be wanting to, jump into the mix, let's just say. And speaking of that, right? Happy Thanksgiving to you as well, Bees Nuts. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad I got to say your name. It's always a good time for me. Speaking of other nations, or let's just say organizations, or even outfits we could call them, wanting to get involved to possibly just get combat experience, we also have Yemeni mercenaries. But here's the weird part. Russia sends Yemeni mercenaries to fight in Ukraine after they were tricked into signing up for war by Iran-backed Houthis. Report. Okay. November 24th, yesterday. Now here's something I want you to keep in mind. We're now in the Middle East. We're now talking about Middle Eastern troops fighting in the Ukraine and Russian conflict. This is not just in one place. This is not affecting one place, but this is also showing an interesting relationship that is in the Middle East. So, Russia has sent hundreds of Yemeni mercenaries to fight in Ukraine after a company with ties to the Iran-backed Houthi terror group tricked them into traveling to Moscow, where they were forced to sign up for the Russian military, according to a report. Several of the recruits claimed they were approached in July by the Al Jabri Company, founded by prominent Houthi politician Abdulwali Abdo Hassan Al Jabri, with the promise of securing a new life in Russia. Instead, the men were reportedly coerced to sign an enlistment contract that they could not read and shipped off to the front lines as part of the growing relationship between the Kremlin and the Houthi rebels. Okay? The Houthis are now getting troops for Russia to use in Ukraine. One recruit, identified as Nabil, told the FT he was just one of some 200 Yemenis forcibly conscripted into the Russian army in September, noting that many of them had no military training at all. Okay? Nabil said he joined Al Jabri, which is registered as a tour operator and retail supplier, in hopes of securing a job in security or engineering to pay for his studies back home. And a month later, he found himself tossed in the front lines, dressed in the Russian military wear and hiding in a forest from a Ukraine counterstrike. So, Russia is farming troops from all over the world. People related to the Houthis are getting sent to the front lines, right? Like, this is evolving. And now here's something I want to just bring up again, just to kind of, I don't know, basically jog your memory a little bit in order to kind of build the full picture as to how intertwined some of these groups are at this point. So the Houthis, right? Do you remember back in, I think it was October. Let's see here. October 24th, okay, 2024. Russia helped Houthis target Red Sea ships. Russia, earlier this year, provided satellite data to help Yemen's Houthi rebels strike ships in the Red Sea. The U.S. Daily, citing a person familiar with the matter and two anonymous European defense officials, reported that the data was transmitted by Iranian intermediaries and used to target ships with missiles and drones. The Houthis, who control vast swaths of Yemen, started targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea back in October of 2023. So, keep this in mind. Not only is Russia now getting troops for their front lines from the Houthis in Yemen, but also providing the Houthis with the data to attack specific ships in the Red Sea, likely not linked to Russia. Now, there has been evidence of Russian ships being struck by these Houthi rebels, but I have a feeling that has since been remedied, and now their targets are given to them via the Russian military, which means this is fifth-generation warfare, right? Okay, well, we're going to fight you up here, but we're also going to be blowing up your ships down here, but, not us, it's the Houthis. So you can see how this is moving all over the world. And we also have the Iranian influence as well, because Iran might not be directly involved in the conflict per se, but their weapons sure are. And if Russia is looking at Western weapons as being a provocation of the West and an extension of the West, then the same can be said for Iran. Ukraine war briefing. Ukraine targeted by nearly 500 Iran-designed drones in a week, Zelensky says. Vladimir Zelensky says he fears his country is becoming a testing ground for Russian weapons. It is. And it's also becoming a testing ground for Western weapons. It is the testing ground for fifth generation as well as the next world war. And it is, unfortunately, at the price of the Ukrainian people. At least that's my assessment, okay? And this is from yesterday, November 24th. Let's see here. With the country being targeted by nearly 500 drones in the past week, as well as more than 20 missiles, and Russia's first use of the Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile in Dnipro on Thursday, on Sunday, Zelensky highlighted the increased level of Shahed drone attacks. Ukraine says Russia has set up 2 factories to make the distinctive Iran-designed Delta-winged Shahed 136 drones called Jiran-2 by Moscow, about 800 miles from the border in Ukraine. Okay, so this is happening. Iran's involved. I mean, they have factories set up 800 miles from the border. it's like everybody's getting a piece of it, right? Because, okay, Iran might not have troops on the front line getting combat experience like what South and North Korea are both worried about right now, but Iran's certainly getting combat experience when it comes to their drones, their drone development, learning from the battlefield what their drones need or don't need or what kind of improvements they need to make. And of course, we're seeing that in regards to the troops on the ground as well. They're setting up, cages around their tanks to try to provide some relief from the drone attacks. They're trying to employ shotguns more often for the infantry forces in order to have some sort of drone deterrent. We're also seeing drone, electro-based weapons being deployed in places like China right now, showing off how easy they can take a drone down with it. It's like it's everybody's learning everything they can from this because they're expecting to need to use it, not because they just like to have a good time, right? So Manda Williams made the live. Hey, y'all. Well, hello to you. Glad you made the live. Thanks for making it in here, okay? Let's see here. MF James, given Russia's population, why are they recruiting so many foreigners? Do they not have a Vietnam-era style draft? MF James, I would say the theory there is a few things. First off, they're calling in favors. And second off, they're trying to use whatever they can for the meat grinder before they have to tap into their more preferred soldiers. And that's an unfortunate thing to have to say, but it's likely the truth, right? They're sending the more disposable troops to the front line first if possible. And that means if they can get random guys from Yemen who didn't know they signed up to be soldiers just thrown to the front line to be bodies for carrying around, heavy equipment or whatever they got to do, then they'd rather do that than have to send more people to the front line who are likely going to meet their end, which means public support suddenly starts dropping. The public gets upset, morale goes down, right? So there's a strategy to it, I'm sure, and that's kind of what I assume it is, but that's what it looks like, and who knows, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what my assumption is there. So, plus, I think they're worried about actually needing the reserve troops and the well-trained units and everything else that they have in their military for when these things go hot between the real deal, like when it goes hot between the U.S. and Russia, when it goes hot between France, the U.K., and Germany and Russia and Poland, right? So I think that's where a lot of that's coming from too. They're concerned that that's a real possibility, and they're waiting to deploy those troops, that level of that caliber of troop when that time comes. So. Cold Reality says saving their best to fight NATO. Exactly. So now, Russia's also putting its nose into the Middle East thing a little bit further as well, but not in regards to Yemen and stuff, but in regards to what's happening in Israel and Gaza, okay? And also Lebanon. But here, real quick, because I'm going to take a sip of coffee anyway, this is my coffee cup that I got as a gift from my kids last Christmas, and I like it a lot. So, and I happen to agree with it as well. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Russia sticking its nose in and getting involved. It's everywhere. I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, but I know you guys get it. I really do. I'm saying this for those who weren't sure or maybe on the fence or are new to this information. This is global. Everyone's involved with everything right now. It's actually kind of crazy. Russia calls for end to Israeli airstrikes on civilians in Lebanon. This is from today. Like I said, a lot going on. The Kremlin on Monday said that Russia called for an end to Israeli airstrikes on civilians in Lebanon. We'd like to see an end to strikes on civilian targets. It's very important that civilians do not become victims of strikes. Interesting thing to say from a country who has repeatedly targeted apartment buildings in Kiev and other major cities in Ukraine. So, to me, this is establishing let's just say, a standard of what they prefer in some of these other regions so they can eventually possibly put some level of deterrence into play, right, to get involved in one way or another by saying, well, we didn't want to get involved, but you guys kept doing the thing we told you not to do, right? So it's very hypocritical, but this is what they're doing. Peskov's remarks came in response to a question on Israel's launch of at least 7 airstrikes on the southern suburb of Beirut on Sunday evening, in the fiercest bombardment since the outbreak of the conflict last year, according to Lebanese state media. The attacks followed Israeli evacuation orders for civilians in 12 buildings in several neighborhoods in southern Beirut, including Haret Rek, Choufei, Goberi, Bir al-Bed, and Mawad. Peskov underlined the importance of ensuring wider channels for delivering humanitarian aid to conflict areas in the Middle East. Because the humanitarian crisis is not only gaining momentum, if we talk about Gaza, then we are all witnessing the most terrible humanitarian crisis which is happening there, the spokesman added. He went on to describe the humanitarian situation in Lebanon as an emergency. So they're trying to get involved. I mean, it looks like that to me. And they're also getting involved with the other part of what Israel is up to. Okay, and you can see they're setting the stage. They're drawing lines. What this is they're forming their teams. They're letting everybody know what side they're on. They're also letting everyone know that they're willing to get involved because they're being staunch about it, right? So Russia blames U.S. for suffering of millions following UN ceasefire veto. This is from November 21st, so 4 days ago. Russia accused the United States of being the sole cause of violence in the Middle East following the country's decision to veto a United Nations resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Washington once again rejected the possibility of stopping the horrific bloodshed in Gaza, which has already killed 44,000 Palestinians and injured 104,000, most of them women and children, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Thursday, citing the most recent casualty statistics from the Gaza Health Ministry. On Wednesday, the U.S. voted to strike down a resolution demanding an end to the hostilities, which urged both parties to pursue a permanent ceasefire, the return of all hostages, and for Israel to ensure access to basic services and humanitarian assistance for those in Gaza. The UN Security Council, which comprises 10 non-permanent alongside 5 permanent members, voted 14-1 in favor of the resolution, but the U.S. veto blocked its adoption. Such a vote speaks for itself, the Russian Foreign Ministry said. There are no illusions or doubts that it is the actions of the United States that are the main and, in fact, the only reason for the escalation of violence and the suffering of millions of civilians in the Middle East and other regions of the world. Now, that's what Russia said, okay? 14-1. So I want you to think about this, and I'm not saying that anyone's right or wrong in this whole assessment. What I'm trying to say here is that Russia is using this contentious crisis there in the Middle East to form teams. And right now, Russia sided with the 14 or the 13 other people who voted for this resolution, while the U.S. is by itself, right? And so you can see how this is working, at least in their opinion, probably in their favor, to gain support from these other countries that might not necessarily have been big Russia supporters before. And so they've learned that by using this very contentious crisis, they can make more divisions when it comes to other nations around the world and create a reason for why they may want to work with Russia directly rather than trying to always, capitulate to the United States. I mean, that's the strategy I assume that they're trying to employ. And that's something that I think is problematic because it is a contentious enough of a scenario that other countries will actually weigh it quite heavily when deciding what side to be on when the big one really takes off. And that's coming sooner than later if things keep going the way of this current administration's desires, which is problematic. I don't like them. I don't like what they're doing. Polar Patriot, Magic has a good radio voice. And that's good because my face isn't the best for this, so maybe that's my next calling. I'm not sure. Now, let's see here. I have one more thing to discuss with you. And it is a little bit dicey, let's just say. Especially, well, first off, there's a high probability that it is just pure propaganda. Okay, so I just want to make sure to get that out of the way. Second off, it's very accusational. And third off, it hasn't been verified by any other sources besides Russian sources. So that is something else to keep in mind, which is why there's a high likelihood that it's propaganda. But it does demonstrate the possibility of something like this occurring here anytime now that could change the way things operate in this war front, okay? And I think that's something that I want you to consider. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying that it's something to consider as a possibility for what either country is capable of at this point in time in this war effort, okay? So I'm not going to share the screen for this because, like I said, it's a little sketch. Okay, but it is, I'm going to tell you about it, okay? Residents of Seledovo have testified about Kiev's forces committing war crimes. Mercenaries in Ukrainian service, including Polish nationals, executed a number of civilians in the city of Seledovo before fleeing, advancing Russian sources, local residents have said. Moscow believes that Kiev wanted to use the massacre for a false flag claim of atrocities. Seledovo sits about 15 kilometers south of Pokrovsk in the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic, controlled by Kiev since 2014. In 2022, it had a population of around 21,000. Russian soldiers secured it completely on October 29th, collecting evidence of Ukrainian war crimes, said on Monday. Now, I don't know if that's true, but what I will say is that either side is extremely capable at this moment in time of pulling off some sort of false flag scenario. And the fact that this is being published by their main source of media, Russia's, that is, basically, letting people know that this happened and, they're trying to set this up. Well, first off, could they set something up like that in order to garner more support? Possibly. Could Russia set something up like that in order to remove more support from them by claiming that they're the ones who are actually at fault? Of course, that's also a possibility. Regardless, the fact that this is even being discussed at the public level that it is shows that there's a propensity for it to actually occur. And I wouldn't be surprised right now over the next 2 months before we have this administration change and before things start hitting the negotiation table or whatever it is, that there's a high risk of these false stories being put out there to try to force someone's hand, right? And I mean, the same thing could happen with a dirty bomb. The same thing could happen with a nuclear detonation. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't have much access to, military intelligence. And so if a nuclear bomb goes off, let's just go like full bore to the moon, right? Nuclear bomb goes off. I am only going to know who did it based on what I'm told, right? I mean, the same goes for most of you, I assume. And unless I have direct knowledge of who launched it, how will I truly know who was at fault? All I'll know is that the media will tell me so-and-so did this, and that's pretty much all I'll be able to go off of, right? So this is where we're at. This war, everybody's involved. Asia's there now. They're doing Asia stuff, right? The Middle East is there now. They're doing Middle East stuff. We are trying to send troops and nukes there, apparently, like 2 months before a new president takes office. I don't know. Is there any motive there? You tell me. I would say if you fabricate a massive crisis, a nuclear crisis, do you have a transition of power at that point? Do you delay things because of how bad of a situation everything's become? Do you have a national emergency that then requires martial law or things of that nature? I don't know, but my internet's freaking out right now. I can tell you that much. And I'm not sure why. So, let's make sure we're still alive. Am I still alive? You guys tell me in the chat. I don't know. Either way, that was the discussion tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure if you are new here, you hit the subscribe button and you also hit the like button if you don't mind to help me out, because we got to get this message out a little bit further. And I think that we do a good job of doing that, but things haven't been as busy around here lately, and I think we need some additional support in that regard. So I appreciate you helping me with that. Share this with people who you think need this information. And if you want to be in the private live stream tonight, you can join the channel membership by hitting the join button down below, and you get into the private live stream by going to my channel page, my community tab, and right there will be the link for that live stream. Or you can join Subscribestar, which is $5 a month. There are some additional perks to Subscribestar, but right now things have been a little slow over there because I'm working on some new programs, but I will say that it is a good way to get a hold of me too. Ribestar, that's totally what I wanted to do with that. Thanks, Subscribestar, you did great. Let me put the link in the chat one more time. There you go, that's Subscribestar. And what that does is it allows you to be in the live chat as well, and on your Subscribestar feed, it will be right there for you. Honestly, I do not hold information behind a paywall, so nothing discussed in the chat tonight is pertinent to your preparedness. So please don't feel like that's something you're missing out on regarding that. Everything here is free. That's important for this preparedness community. The private live streams are only my way of saying thank you to people who wanted to directly support the channel financially, and I try to come up with a good way to say thank you and show my appreciation for that, and that's how I do it. So listen, keep prepping. These 2 months could be crazy. They could be very calm, too, for all I know. And in fact, that's my preference. So let's just hope things chill out. Let's hope the speculation is correct too. Russia's not going to do anything for 2 months because they know they got to talk to Trump. Well, if that's true, I guess good thing that's real. But I'm not going to bet my life on that one either. So I'm going to keep prepping. Hopefully you guys do too. Anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com. Rhonda Pagan, thank you so much for being here. Savage Lee, thank you as well. Jay Barilla, I appreciate you mentioning NY Prepper in the chat. Listen, he does have some good information, and he does monitor those radio waves better than anybody else I know. And Greg is actually a very nice guy, and me and him have good conversations. And you know what? The guy also has really cool information about ballistics and armor testing, which a lot of people probably don't notice because they're there for his information. But keep that in mind. He's got good stuff regarding that, too. You guys are awesome. Catching Cotton says it's usually gun talk in the private chat. Yeah, it is. Not going to lie. You guys have a great night. MagicPrepper.com has your back if you need anything else from me. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.